The alarms are already screaming when we begin, not a slow build, full alert, red light flooding every surface on the bridge of the Sovereign, every screen showing the same thing, multiple contact signatures, all of them clustered around a single small blue planet at the edge of a quiet solar system nobody had bothered to map carefully before today. Admiral Vex Corral doesn't flinch. She never does. She stands at the forward viewport with her hands clasped behind her back, all nearly 8 feet of her, blue-scaled skin catching the red light and turning it violet. Her amber eyes are steady. They've been steady for 3 days, locked on that planet below. That small, wet, divided world that long-range survey probes had flagged as inhabited but not advanced. Earth. A single word, simple, almost blunt. 3 days of observation had told her a great deal. Not all of it flattering. The surface was carved into dozens of separate political territories, each with its own military, each using chemical propulsion to push objects through space. Technology the Empire had moved past 10,000 years ago. Their orbital presence was scattered, stations that didn't coordinate, satellites that competed, ships that were small and slow and clearly built on no common doctrine, no planet-wide defense network, no unified command structure visible from orbit, just noise. Disorganized, expensive, inefficient noise. She had filed a preliminary assessment on day 2. Pre-contact species, significant internal divisions, technology posing no strategic threat to the Empire. Standard procedure from here: open a channel, make the offer, give them the terms. Was give them a reasonable window to comply and move on. She had done this 11 times before. It always went the same way. Some species took longer than others to accept the reality of their situation, but they always did. The math was never complicated once you laid it out clearly. Commander Dren was beside her at the viewport, his silver-gray skin pulling the red light differently. He was watching the dark side of the Terminator line, where small vessels were scrambling, burning hard, trying to form something that resembled a defensive posture. His expression was the one he reserved for things he found amusing and slightly beneath his attention. "Look at them," Dren said. "No formation, no coordinated acceleration. 3 of them just burned crossing each other's paths because they weren't even talking to each other. Burning actual chemical fuel." He made a short sound that was almost a laugh. "We could go around this system and they wouldn't be able to follow us out of their own gravity well." Coral said nothing. She was watching the same ships, but she was cataloging differently. How fast had they scrambled? How quickly had they identified the Sovereign's position? Not instantly, but not as slowly as she might have expected. They had gone from no visible response to active scramble in under 40 minutes. That was worth noting. "Open a communication channel," she said. "Any vessel or station broadcasting on a coherent frequency. Get me whoever's in charge of their response." The main screen resolved from static to a clear image. A human woman. Dark hair, cut short and practical, a simple dark uniform. She sat at what looked like a command station, functional, clearly active. Her face was composed, not the way a diplomat's face is composed after training, composed the way a person's face looks when they genuinely aren't afraid, or if they were afraid, they'd put it somewhere it couldn't be seen and left it there. "This is General Maya Chen, head of Earth's Unified Defense Command. You are in restricted space. State your identity, your origin, and your purpose for being here." Coral let the silence sit for 2 seconds. "I am Admiral Vex Corral of the Imperial Sovereign Fleet, operating under the authority of Emperor Zrath of the Galactic Empire. This system has been designated for first contact integration under Imperial expansion protocols. I am prepared to offer Earth formal protected territory status within the Empire, with all associated trade and security benefits." Chen listened without changing her expression. She didn't write anything down. She didn't look off-screen to confer with anyone. When Corral finished, she said, "Earth does not accept the terms as described. We are a sovereign planet. This is our solar system. You are in it without permission. I'll ask you to state any hostile intent, and then we can determine whether there is a conversation worth having." Dren made that sound again, louder this time. Coral kept her focus on Chen. "General, the Empire spans over 1,000 worlds. Our fleet presence in this region alone exceeds anything your combined orbital forces could approach. I'm not here to issue threats, but it would be a disservice to you if I implied that refusal carries no consequences." "I appreciate the directness," Chen said. "What happens if we refuse?" "The Empire has protocols for that." "I'm sure it does." Something shifted in Chen's expression, not fear, decision. "Thank you, Admiral. We'll be in contact." The screen went dark. The humans had cut the channel themselves. Not a technical problem. They simply ended it. Dren stared at the blank screen. "They cut us off." "Yes," Corral said. "Send a scout ship forward," she said. "Low orbit, sensor data on their orbital infrastructure." The scout moved in, sleek, fast, settling into its scan pattern when a new contact appeared on the tactical display. Small, moving at a speed that wasn't consistent with chemical propulsion. "Contact moving to intercept the scout," the tactical officer said. "Speed is, I'm recalculating. That is not chemical propulsion." "What is it?" "I don't know. The signature doesn't match our database." The contact was boxy and ugly, and nothing about it suggested speed, but it was fast. It closed on the scout in under 4 minutes and matched velocity precisely with no visible deceleration burn. It attached to the scout's hull with a simple mechanical docking. Deliberate. Then the scout went dark. Every signal, every telemetry feed, every beacon, silent. "Analysis," Corral said. "Electromagnetic pulse weapon, targeted. It found the specific frequency band the scout systems operate on and hit it precisely. The scout isn't destroyed. It's just off." Dren was no longer making amused sounds. The main screen activated on its own. Chen, again. Same composed face. "That was a warning, Admiral Corral. We're returning your crew. I'm asking you to leave our solar system. You have 24 hours. After that, we'll need a different kind of conversation." The screen went dark. The bridge was very quiet. Corral looked at the tactical display, the scattered human vessels, the drifting dark dot that had been her scout ship, the blue curve of Earth below. She thought about the assessment she had filed, the preliminary report, pre-contact civilization, chemical propulsion, no strategic threat. "All ships," she said, "we are withdrawing to the outer system boundary." She was still looking at Earth, at that small, wet, divided world with its one very precise electromagnetic pulse. "We'll be back," she said quietly. "And next time, we won't underestimate you." The Sovereign's engines cycled up, the fleet moved, and Earth was left exactly as it had been. 3 months passed. They felt longer from the inside. The Grand Imperial Council chamber on Zarvis Prime was designed to make visitors feel small. Ceilings vaulted to heights that served no structural purpose. Walls carved from deep black stone, quarried from a moon that no longer existed. The floor so perfectly polished that the lights above were reflected in it, creating the sensation of floating suspended in space. Emperor Zrath had received 217 delegations in this room. None of them had left feeling comfortable. Admiral Corral was not a visitor, but she had never stood here while explaining a retreat, and the difference was significant. Zrath sat in his command chair at the far end of the chamber, and his bioluminescent skin patterns were cycling deep violet. That was not a good color. Deep violet was somewhere between profound irritation and the early edge of fury. You retreated," Zrath said. His voice didn't need to be raised. The acoustics carried it perfectly. "From a pre-contact civilization using chemical propulsion." "The situation was more complex than the survey data indicated," Corral said. "You've explained the complexity. What I'm asking is why complexity was sufficient reason to withdraw an Imperial fleet from a first-contact engagement." Commander Dren stood to Corral's left. His scales had gone a pale, washed-out yellow that meant he was stressed beyond his normal operating range. He had said nothing since entering the room and showed no signs of changing that. "Their propulsion wasn't chemical across the board," Corral said. "The survey drones didn't get close enough. The vessel that neutralized our scout operated on technology that doesn't appear anywhere in our database. And General Chen's conduct throughout the contact didn't match a pre-contact civilization reacting to first alien encounter. She acted like someone who had prepared." Zrath's skin pulsed once, deep and slow. Prepared. Yes, Emperor. The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms when very powerful beings are making decisions. Minor officials who had been standing along the chamber walls went very still. The doors at the far end of the chamber opened. Everyone turned at the sound. Those doors were not supposed to open during an Imperial audience without announcement. A junior officer came through them at something between a run and a controlled sprint, and when he reached the appropriate point on the floor, he dropped immediately to both knees. His face was pale in a way that wasn't from exertion. Emperor. Long-range sensor command requests immediate relay of contact data. Sector 9. Inbound vessel. Massive. Entering controlled space without IFF response. Energy readings don't correspond to anything in our database. The quiet laughter that had existed at the edges of this session was completely gone. The chamber was utterly still. Emperor Zrath stood. His bioluminescent patterns shifted away from violet, something cooler. Assessment. He turned his gaze to the shadowed corner near the secondary entrance and said, Sen. From that shadow, a figure separated itself. Captain Lyra Sen had been standing there so motionlessly that several people in the room had apparently looked directly at her without registering her presence. She was compact and precise, with metallic cognitive implants running from her left temple to her jawline, now one eye organic and one cybernetic. She moved forward without hurry. 5 warships, Zrath said. Your battle group. Jump to intercept. Sen nodded once and was out of the room in under a minute. Corral watched her go and tried to calculate what she would find. The jump took 3 hours. Sen's battle group dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 9, and the contact was immediately there on every sensor platform. Not hiding, not maneuvering, just sitting in the middle of Sector 9 like it had been there all along and was waiting for someone to arrive and look at it properly. The Ironclad. The name was rendered on the hull in angular human script. The vessel was enormous in a way the numbers hadn't fully conveyed. Enormous and blocky and covered in so many layers of overlapping hull plate that the surface looked almost geological, like something compressed over millennia rather than constructed. No elegant lines, no swept curves, no design language suggesting art or aesthetics. Every external feature appeared to serve a function, and where a single structure would have been sufficient, there were 3. Sen studied it with her organic eye, while her cybernetic eye flooded her with data. Mass readings, energy output, propulsion signature. That is not in our database, her second-in-command said. No, Sen agreed, it isn't. She opened a hailing channel. The screen resolved. A human woman, short red hair, brown eyes, simple dark uniform. She looked at Sen with the same settled quality Corral had described in Chen. Not performed, not diplomatic, just genuinely steady. Captain Reyna Kovac, commanding the Ironclad. We're here to request formal diplomatic talks with Imperial leadership, peaceful intent. I'll submit to whatever verification protocol you require. Sen looked at her for a moment. Our intelligence profile on human technology does not match what I'm looking at. The discrepancy is significant. Explain that before we discuss anything else. Kovac tilted her head slightly. Did you really think we'd tell the first aliens who arrived making territorial demands everything we had? We shared what we chose to share. Admiral Corral saw what we showed her. Silence on Sen's bridge. Her science officer spoke quietly, for Sen only. Captain, the fusion containment method on that vessel, for the temperatures involved. Physical material containment should be impossible with any material we know of. Sen kept her face neutral. Captain Kovac, I'm authorized to host preliminary diplomatic discussions aboard my flagship, the Relentless. Will you join me with a representative team? Kovac considered this for perhaps 3 seconds. Yes, 3 people. Our own shuttle. No weapons. We'll be expecting you, Sen said and closed the channel. She stood a moment looking at the space where the transmission had been. Then she sent an emergency priority message to Zarvis Prime. The Ironclad sat in the middle of Sector 9 and didn't move. It was very patient. Kovac came aboard the Relentless with exactly 3 people. A young communications officer, a security specialist who moved with compact efficiency, and Dr. Marcus Webb, chief physicist, the architect of the Ironclad's propulsion and weapon systems. He was older than Sen had expected, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of stillness that comes from decades spent on very complex problems. He carried a small case he didn't let anyone else touch. The Imperial diplomatic chamber was designed with the same psychological intent as the council chamber. High ceilings, polished dark materials, calibrated lighting that made visitors feel peripherally uncomfortable. The effect was usually reliable. The four humans walked in, looked around once, and stopped paying attention to it, like it was any room. Webb placed a compact holographic projector at the center of the table without asking permission and activated it. A three-dimensional schematic rotated in the air between them, a cross-section of the Ironclad's core systems. Sen's science officer leaned forward without quite meaning to. "The Empire builds beautiful systems," Webb said. His voice was quiet and measured. "Your energy field plasma containment is genuinely elegant, precise tolerances, minimal mass overhead. It works at extraordinary efficiency. We studied everything we could access about it." "And," Sen's science officer said, despite herself, "your energy field is a single point of coherence. If the field resonance breaks, a sufficient electromagnetic disruption, a power cascade, a resonance mismatch, the field collapses. When the field collapses, your reactor goes with it." Webb touched a point on the hologram. "This is the Ironclad's containment, physical. Layered composite materials, heavy, slow, significantly less efficient than your approach." He let that sit. "But," he continued, "when one layer fails, 5 more hold. When 3 layers fail, 4 more hold. When 5 layers fail, and we've never had 5 fail simultaneously, 3 more hold. Your energy field fails once and your reactor dies. Ours fails incrementally, and each failure gives the crew time to respond. Different philosophy, different result." Sen's science officer said quietly, "That's profoundly inefficient." "Yes," Webb said, "also profoundly difficult to destroy permanently." Kovacs watched Sen's science officer while Webb spoke. The officer had leaned forward, then caught herself leaning forward and pulled back. She had not managed to keep the interest off her face. That was information. Or Kovacs. "We're not here to discuss weapon systems. We came to talk about peaceful engagement. That's the priority." Sen's communicator buzzed. She stepped to the far side of the room, her sensor officer's voice in her ear. "Captain, the Ironclad has powered its offensive systems, all of them. At full output, the modeled capability would be sufficient to disable all 5 ships in the battle group simultaneously. They are not targeting us. Readiness posture only." Sen controlled her breathing. She walked back to the table. "Your ship has activated its offensive systems," she said. Kovacs nodded. "While we were sitting here, your Emperor dispatched a reinforcement fleet to this sector. It arrives in approximately 58 minutes. We noticed the dispatch and made the logical adjustment. We're not threatening you. We're being honest about our readiness. There's a difference." Complete silence. Sen's mind moved fast. How had they detected a classified reinforcement dispatch from Zarvis Prime? That communication was encrypted on 7 independent layers. The interception and decryption should require technology well beyond anything the survey data suggested Earth possessed, which meant the survey data had been wrong, which meant everything built on it needed to be reconsidered from the beginning. Kovacs spoke quietly to Webb while Sen composed an emergency message. "They still don't understand what they're looking at." Webb nodded once without looking up. "They will." The Grand Imperial Council Chamber, 3rd emergency session in 4 days. Sen stood at the presentation dais and delivered her report with the flat precision of someone who had decided accuracy mattered more than the comfort of the people listening. 12 independent computer cores. Not a primary and backups, 12 fully parallel systems, any one of which could run the entire ship alone. 6 separate power grids with dynamic load balancing that rerouted automatically in under 3 seconds. 3 propulsion systems using 3 different physical principles. Redundant weapons, redundant life support, redundant navigation. "They don't build for perfection," Sen said. "They build for survival under failure. Their design doctrine assumes things will break and prioritizes maintaining function after the break rather than preventing the break in the first place. It is not efficient by any conventional measure, but it is extraordinarily difficult to stop. Counselor Orth of the Tulare Confederation was on his feet immediately. The resource requirements for that level of redundancy are absurd. You're describing a vessel that costs 3 times what it needs to cost. Counselor, Sen said, absurd and effective are not mutually exclusive. The silence that followed was a different quality than usual council silence. Sen had said something true and uncomfortable in a place that preferred comfortable and strategic. Emperor Zrath spoke. Bring them here. Kovacs and Webb. I want to hear it directly. Kovacs and Webb entered the council chamber without ceremony. No elaborate preparation. They walked in, assessed the room once, and stood before Emperor Zrath as if they had done this before. They hadn't, as far as anyone knew, but they looked like they had. Zrath spoke directly. We have ruled for 10,000 years. No species has ever approached us as equals. What makes you believe you are different? Kovacs looked at him steadily. Because the alternative is a conflict that costs both sides enormously and ends with no outcome that benefits anyone. Not because we'd necessarily win or you'd necessarily win. Because wars between species that have found each other are bad for everyone, and you've been in this galaxy long enough to know that. Webb activated his projector. Holographic data filled the council chamber. Trade models, mutual defense frameworks, scientific exchange protocols, governance structures that preserved the sovereignty of member species while creating coordination mechanisms across Imperial territory. Your empire stabilized this galaxy after the Chaos Wars, Webb said. That mattered to every species in every system across this region of space. We're not asking you to abandon what you built. We're asking you to update it, to move from a model based on control toward one based on cooperation. You've already done the hard part. You built the infrastructure. We're proposing something to run on it. Zrath. And if we refuse? Kovacs. Then we defend ourselves. We'll be very good at it, but that's genuinely not why we're here. The junior officer came through the chamber doors and dropped to both knees. He was breathing harder than the sprint accounted for. 17 energy signatures, distributed throughout Imperial space, all matching the Ironclad's propulsion and power profile, all holding position. None visible to Imperial sensors until right now. The council chamber went completely still. Not the silence of calculation, the silence of shock. Kovacs let it hold a moment. Insurance. Those ships hold position on standing orders not to fire first under any circumstances. They're there if Earth is attacked. They will not move otherwise. Zrath looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. You could have attacked when our fleet retreated from Earth. You had every advantage. Why didn't you? Because that's not who we are. Winning through destruction just creates more of the problem you were trying to solve. We learned that the hard way, over a very long time, fighting each other on our own planet. We know what it costs. We don't want any more of it. And this is the moment I keep coming back to when I think about what happened in that chamber. 17 ships spread through the heart of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, sitting quietly on a standing order not to fire first. The humans could have kept them hidden, could have held them as a secret. Instead, they told Zrath exactly where every one of them was. What do you think they were really counting on? What did they believe about Zrath that made transparency feel safer than secrecy? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. Zrath sat back in his command chair. His bioluminescent patterns shifted slowly through deliberation colors. We will continue these discussions in the diplomatic wing. Formal sessions. He looked at Kovacs directly. We will see what there is to build. Later, when the chamber had cleared, Coral stood near Zrath's chair. They're bluffing, she said quietly. They cannot have built a fleet that size. Zrath turned to look at her. Admiral, are you willing to bet the Empire on that assumption? Coral said nothing. Because I am not, Zrath said, and I suggest you consider carefully before you are. 48 hours later, the talks collapsed, not slowly, not with a long negotiation where positions gradually hardened. The collapse came on a single clause. Imperial oversight of Earth's military development. The human delegation read it, conferred for less than 3 minutes, and returned with a response that was polite, clear, and completely final, non-negotiable. That clause was a wall. Emperor Zarath's war room was functional rather than impressive. Maps, displays, tactical calculations. The room where decisions became actions. 20 battlecruisers, Admiral Corral leading, flagship Conqueror, with Dren at her side. Dren's smirk had returned somewhere between the war room briefing and emergence from faster-than-light travel. Perhaps it was the math. 20 ships against 1 was a ratio that had historically produced confident expressions. The Ironclad sat in open space, same patient bulk, same overlapping hull plate, same absence of elegant design. 20 Imperial warships arranged themselves around it at standard engagement distance in a formation rehearsed thousands of times. Dren. Whatever they have, this is just math. Coral opened the channel. Kovac appeared. Same expression, same composed, unreadable face. Why, behind her the bridge of the Ironclad was active, crew at stations, hands on controls, no visible panic, measured activity. Admiral Corral, Kovac said, we came here looking for peace. Whatever you're about to do, that choice is yours, not ours. Corral looked at her for a moment. Then, all ships, fire. 20 energy weapons discharged simultaneously. The space around the Ironclad lit up like a second sun being born, channels of focused energy converging from every direction at once. Precise, overwhelming, the kind of firepower that had ended wars. The beams bent. Not metaphorically, not a shielding effect that absorbed or deflected. The beams literally curved in long arcs around the hull of the Ironclad, as if the space around the ship had a different geometry than the space everywhere else. Not a single beam reached the hull. Everyone curled around and dissipated into the dark beyond. The bridge of the Conqueror was absolutely silent for 3 full seconds. Coral's weapons officer spoke carefully, checking each word before releasing it. Gravitational lens field. They're creating a localized curvature in space-time around the hull. Our energy weapons follow the geometry of space. They can't travel in a straight line where space itself isn't straight. The curvature redirects them before impact. Dren. That's not a shield, that's physics, the science officer said. Panels opened along the Ironclad's hull. Not energy weapon apertures, no charging glow, no warming up harmonic. Mechanical apertures, barrel-shaped, dense and thick-walled. They looked old-fashioned, industrial. The Ironclad fired. No flash, no beam, no visible projectile. One battlecruiser simply went dark. Systems dead. Tumbling slowly on its last maneuvering thrust. Kinetic projectile, small mass, near light-speed velocity. The weapons officer's voice had gone flat with the effort of staying professional. Our shields stop energy. They stop fields. They stop beams. They don't stop mass. A physical object moving at that velocity carries kinetic energy. Our shields have no mechanism to interact with. Evasive maneuvers. All ships scatter. The formation broke. Ships peeled away in every direction, burning hard. The Ironclad tracked them without hurry, each shot placed with deliberate precision at moments that allowed no effective evasive response. Methodical, almost patient, 3 ships dark, then 6, then 10, then 12, none destroyed. Not one Imperial ship ceased to exist. They were disabled, systems killed, propulsion offline, weapons silent, crew alive. The Ironclad was taking ships out of the fight without taking lives, one at a time, like someone removing pieces from a board with careful hands. On the bridge of the Conqueror, no one was speaking, not even to report. The tactical officer was updating the display in silence because there was nothing useful to say about what the display was showing. Dren had his hands clasped at his back, the same way Corral always stood, but where hers was a posture of control, his was the posture of a person who had nothing else left to do with his hands. The formation that had never failed to produce a decisive outcome had stopped existing as a formation. It was just damaged ships at random angles. Kovac appeared on screen again. Admiral, you've lost 12 ships. None of your weapons reach us. We can continue doing this or we can stop. I would very much prefer to stop. Behind her, in the background of the transmission, another cruiser went silently dark. Coral stood at her station on the bridge of the Conqueror. 23 years in command, 41 separate engagements across 17 star systems. She had retreated precisely once in her career, and she had come back here to correct that. She looked at the tactical display. 13 ships dark. 7 remaining, none in effective position. The Ironclad was exactly where it had been when they arrived. It hadn't moved. "Stand down all weapons," she said, barely above a whisper. "All ships, cease fire. We are withdrawing." The bridge remained still. No one spoke. Dren said nothing. His scales were almost white. Kovac. "Safe journey home." "Admiral." As the surviving fleet entered faster than light travel, Coral watched the Ironclad on the rear sensor feed for as long as it remained visible. One ship, holding position, unhurried, already retracting the apertures on its hull. "Everything has changed," she said, to no one in particular, to herself. Everything. Zarvis Prime moved at the speed of catastrophe. The news traveled on every communication channel the Empire possessed, and it traveled fast because bad news always does. 20 ships, 1 human vessel, 13 disabled, 0 destroyed, and the humans had chosen to stop before finishing the job. That last part was the part that traveled differently. It wasn't a victory. A victory would have been simpler to process. This was something else. The humans had been winning decisively and had stopped. That choice was a message in itself, and everyone in the Empire's 1,000 worlds was trying to read it correctly. Every species that had been absorbed into the Empire over the past centuries was recalculating. Not loudly, not yet. But the recalculation was happening. Species that had learned to keep their heads down were lifting them slightly. The Imperial Council was fracturing. Councillor Orith wanted full mobilization, every available warship. Several council members quietly agreed. An equal number were already reaching out to the human diplomatic team through private channels, asking whether the framework the Ironclad's crew had proposed was still available. Several were doing both, hedging in the way that powerful beings hedge when they aren't sure which way the ground is moving. Emperor Zrath sat alone in the war room for 2 hours. When he emerged, he called Sen. Sen's report was cold and precise, and worse than everything Zrath already knew, because Sen's reports were always complete. Numbers, ship counts, engagement duration, energy exchange totals, human casualty count, 0, and 17 ships, all confirmed, all holding position in Imperial space, all allowing free transit on Imperial trade routes, none of them engaging or threatening or doing anything except existing in places they weren't supposed to be able to exist. "All 17 confirmed?" Zrath said. "Yes, Emperor. All holding, all allowing free passage, no hostile action from any vessel." "Get me Kovac." He took the communication himself. No intermediary. Kovac appeared on screen in the same dark uniform with the same composed expression. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Zrath. "Same terms as before?" "Yes, Earth sovereignty, non-aggression, trade on mutually agreed terms, an end to forced assimilation, not just for humans, for every species currently inside the Empire's structure, scientific and technological exchange, mutual defense against threats neither party can address alone." Zrath. "You deployed warships throughout my empire and call that peace." Kovac. "We call it security for our diplomatic team. Your Admiral Corral's attack made goodwill insufficient as a safety measure on its own. The ships are there to ensure our people can leave if needed, nothing more." Zrath. "If we accept these terms, the Empire changes permanently. There is no version of this agreement in which things remain as they were." "No," Kovac said, "there isn't." Long silence. On day 4 of the aftermath, the 3 outer rim species that the Empire had absorbed 20 years ago sent formal requests to be included in any new framework. They cited the Ironclad's proposal as a model. They had been watching. By the end of the week, 9 species had submitted formal requests through diplomatic channels. Formal negotiations were authorized. A jointly constructed orbital station, neither Imperial in design nor human in design, built by teams from both sides working together. The exterior carried the graceful lines and resonant materials of Imperial architectural tradition. The internal systems were built to human redundancy standards, with physical backups and layered failsafes running beneath the elegant surface, a structure that looked like the Empire and survived like a human vessel. The talks ran for 47 days. And here's the part that nobody talks about enough when they tell this story. 9 species. 9 different civilizations that had been quietly surviving inside the Empire for decades, some for centuries, watching from the inside, keeping their heads down, adapting to structures that hadn't been built for them. 9 species that sent requests to join a framework they hadn't created on the basis of negotiations they hadn't been part of, because something had shifted and they could feel it moving. Do you think they ever gave up hope that something like this would come? Or did they always know, somewhere in the long, quiet years of just surviving, that the math would eventually change? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read everyone. Day 23 of formal talks. Sen sat across from Kovac and said plainly, your proposal removes the entire hierarchy, Kovac. We're replacing it with one based on contribution rather than conquest. The result looks similar from a distance. There's still structure, still leadership. But the basis for authority changes. That's the part that matters. Day 31. Emperor Zrath himself came to the table. Sat across from Kovac with no handlers and no protocol officer. He looked at her before speaking. My advisors tell me you're bluffing about the fleet numbers. Kovac. Maybe, Zrath. Are you? Kovac held his gaze. Does it change what makes sense here? A pause. No, Zrath said quietly. It doesn't. Day 47. The Galactic Compact was signed in the orbital station, in a room that looked out at both the planet below and the open dark above. Not a surrender, not a conquest, a restructuring. The Empire remained in name and in tradition. The infrastructure, the roots, the long history of stability it had built over 10,000 years. But the function of it was changing, moving from something based on control toward something based on coordination. Zrath signed first, then Kovac, then Sen. Then 11 species representatives brought in from an adjacent room, one by one, to add their mark to the document. Admiral Coral stood at the back of the room for all of it. She hadn't been asked to sign. She wasn't part of the official delegation. But she had come, and she stayed through the signing, and she watched every mark being made and every hand being extended across the table. She didn't say anything, not to Kovac, not to anyone. But she stayed until the last. 6 months after the signing. Bridge of the Ironclad. Deep space. The stars didn't look the same as they had a year ago. Nothing did. Kovac stood at the forward viewport and felt it every time she came up here. The context had changed, and when the context changes, everything inside it looks at least slightly different. Webb came up beside her. He had a data pad and the look on his face that meant numbers were better than expected. Second Fleet, 3 ships fully operational, 7th ahead of schedule, production facilities at full capacity. We're going to hit the completion target 6 weeks early. Good. The Empire's science teams have formally requested access to the material containment research data. Full access. They want to understand the physics. Kovac. Give it to them. That's what the compact is for. Webb looked at his pad for a moment. Admiral Corral has submitted a request for observer status on our next patrol. Kovac turned to look at him fully. Corral. She wants to understand how we operate. Her exact wording. I want to understand how you think. Kovac was quiet for a moment. Admiral Vex Coral. The officer who had retreated from Earth and come back with 20 warships to settle the question by force, who had stood at the back of a signing ceremony she hadn't been invited to and watched until the last signature was made. Now she wanted to understand how the Ironclad's crew thought. Approved, Kovac said. Full access, no restricted areas. Webb looked at her. All areas? All areas. If we're doing this for real, we do it for real. Coral arrived quietly. She came aboard in a small shuttle with 2 crew members who waited in the docking bay while she came up to the bridge alone. She positioned herself at the back near the secondary tactical station and went still. The same motionlessness that Sen's people had described, the stillness of someone who had learned you see more when you don't move. She watched. She said almost nothing for the first 6 hours. The bridge crew went about their work and she observed. She was learning to see differently. The hierarchy on the Ironclad's bridge was flatter than any Imperial crew she had commanded. Decisions were faster. Individual station officers had authority to act without waiting for command confirmation. The redundancy wasn't just in the ship's physical systems, it was in the command structure itself. Anyone on that bridge could keep essential functions running if the people above them were unavailable. The other thing Corral noticed was how the crew communicated during routine operations. Short statements, direct questions, confirmations given in a word or two rather than a formal acknowledgement. It was faster than Imperial bridge protocol. Not because it was less precise, it was equally precise, but because it cut everything that existed for the purpose of hierarchy rather than function. Every exchange was about the information itself, not about who was transmitting it to whom. Then the signal came in. Not a known contact signature, not Imperial, not a compact member vessel, not from any database on the bridge. A burst transmission from a system 60 light-years outside the boundaries of any mapped territory, outside the Empire, outside the Compact, outside anything charted. The direction of origin was empty space on every chart they had. The signal was structured, not noise, not a system artifact. It had a repeating internal pattern that didn't match any known communication protocol, but the structure itself was unmistakable once you started looking at it. Deliberate, organized, something had made it. Webb was already at the analysis station. The bridge went quiet without anyone saying so, the kind of quiet that happens organically when something arrives that everyone knows is important. 16 minutes passed. Nobody spoke. The pattern, Webb said finally. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was managing something large. The repeating structure matches a mathematical sequence. Your Earth's radio astronomers identified it 63 years ago as an anomaly in background radiation. We cataloged it as unexplained and couldn't find a source. He looked up from his station. We have a source now. Kovac moved to stand beside him and look at the data directly. The sequence on the screen was clean and unmistakable, and coming from 60 light-years away in a direction no one had ever looked carefully. They've been watching, she said. Webb. For how long? Long enough, Kovac said. Long enough to know when to reach out. Coral moved. She came forward from the back of the bridge, steadily, and stood beside Kovac and looked at the data. Her cybernetic eye processed quietly. Her organic eye was doing something harder to name. My people have a record of something like this, Corral said. Her voice had dropped. Sector 41, 400 years ago. We classified it as sensor drift and archived it. The file has a low priority designation. I don't think anyone has opened it in 3 centuries. Kovac turned to look at her. You had it 400 years ago. We dismissed it. The signal pulsed again. Stronger. Measurably stronger. Every instrument on the bridge registered the shift at the same moment. Whatever was sending this was aware that someone was receiving it. Kovac. Are they answering us or asking us something? Webb checked his readings, rechecked them. The silence was a full second long. I think they're doing both at once. Coral's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Did we just get noticed? Kovac turned from the data to the viewport. The dark ahead was what dark always is, patient and immense and full of things that light hadn't reached yet. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, cold, solid, the universe beyond it vast and quiet and waiting. We were always noticed, she said. The question was whether we were ready, whether we'd figured out how to stop tearing each other apart long enough to be worth talking to. Maybe that's what they were watching for. Not technology, not power. Just the moment when we decided to be something worth meeting. The signal pulsed a third time, long and steady. A note held in space, clear and deliberate and patient. Set new course, Kovac said, bearing toward the signal origin. Her navigator. That's outside all charted territory, Captain. I know. She didn't say anything else for a moment. Coral was watching her from beside the viewport. After a long pause, Coral said, I'll inform the Emperor. Kovac glanced at her sideways, almost a smile. Tell him we're not going to conquer whatever's out there. Coral, for the first time, almost smiled back. Almost. I know, she said. The Ironclad adjusted its heading. The 2 Imperial escort vessels running alongside on the joint patrol fell in without being asked. No order was given to them. They simply moved. Behind them, a galaxy was doing the slow, hard work of changing. Species that had spent decades keeping their heads down were lifting them. Trade routes that had run through Imperial checkpoints were opening into something more like roads between neighbors. Technologies that had lived in one civilization's archives for centuries were crossing species lines for the first time, but being examined by people who hadn't built them and finding applications their original designers hadn't imagined. The 47 days of negotiation had produced a document. What came after the document was harder and more interesting. The daily labor of actually becoming what the agreement said you were, adjusting institutions and habits and assumptions built over thousands of years. That work was underway. Not finished, not even close, but underway in thousands of places at once, in conversations and workshops and laboratories and council chambers across 1,000 worlds. Ahead, the signal. Long and steady and patient, repeating at intervals that felt almost like breathing. Something out there had watched all of it, the first contact in Earth's orbit, the electromagnetic pulse that went dark a scout ship, the 24-hour ultimatum delivered by a calm woman with short dark hair, the retreat and the return and the battle that didn't end in destruction, the 47 days of talking, 6 months of a galaxy reorganizing itself around a new idea. And now it was speaking. Whatever came next, humanity wouldn't face it alone. They would face it alongside people who had tried to conquer them and failed, and who had been honest enough about what that failure meant to sit down and find a different path. They would face it alongside a civilization 10,000 years older than their own, and alongside 9 other species who had watched and waited and finally stepped forward. They would face it as what they had always been, stubborn and creative and overbuilt and redundant and absolutely, structurally, by design and by temperament, and by 10,000 years of very hard experience, impossible to permanently shut down. The dark ahead was not empty. It had never been empty. It was simply waiting to be properly introduced.